Everyone's trying to stay motivated these days. They read books, watch videos, hype themselves up. But what if that's the wrong game entirely? What if you could completely move your emotions from the equation and let the systems themselves carry you even when you feel nothing? So James, do you think most people overvalue motivation and undervalue structure? What's your take?
My first impression is that question is quite big, quite broad. So first, I think I need a definition of motivation.
So motivation is difficult to define. Obviously, the dictionary does that quite well in and of itself. But here, what I'm talking about is when you watch YouTube videos, or I would say YouTube, namely, or even TikTok, people are constantly trying to hype themselves up or hype other people up or get them really excited about something. And so that creates this very, very temporary feeling of this emotion, that is translated to motivation. And I can't remember which of the hormones causes this, but it's short-lived. And so what I'm saying here is a lot of people will get started on something with that energy, but they don't follow through. And what I'm arguing is that if we had a structure already, a pre-set up structure that will kind of like a conveyor belt almost, that will still keep you moving even when you lose motivation, or rather you could work bereft of emotion altogether. So I'm arguing that that is better, I guess, than just, or rather just, I'm just claiming that motivation itself is overvalued, that it isn't everything.
If that's your definition of motivation, then absolutely, it is overrated. And my definition of motivation is almost, you can almost, like, I think of motivation as like the starter of an engine. Like you turn on the engine, it spins and it goes. That's what it's for. Everything beyond that, I don't think it's useful for anything. You know, when I think of I think of motivational speeches, people yelling, people cheering, that kind of stuff. I think that's overrated. And I have my own reasons, but I think I'm going to let you talk about your reasons first.
Yeah, so the last thing you said there, those motivational speeches, they really get people amped up. But motivation in and of itself is merely that. It's emotional fuel. So what is fuel? Fuel is finite. It runs out. So that's the first point. Another analogy is motivation is like the weather, whereas systems are climates. So the weather changes. Motivation changes. Your motivation for doing something may change. Your feeling about something may change. In fact, it probably will. I mean, human, right? That's how they work. Whereas a system, once you create a system, assuming that it's, doing what it's meant to be doing, it's consistent. It's reliable. It can work without the motivation behind it, which means you don't have to worry about it failing. Because I feel like when you run out of energy, when you run out of that motivational fuel, what do you do next? We can talk about that, but so I've heard people say many times that they're not disciplined, or I've said it myself that others I've observed are not disciplined, but what they're really lacking are those guardrails. So the system itself, or a system that they can rely on. Do you feel relying solely on motivation is a stable way to look at things? And if not, or if not, how would you quantify or create a model for the inconsistency if you see inconsistency there, if this were a system?
Yeah, I absolutely do see motivation. I'll say it like this. I think motivation is absolutely not enough. And I almost have this view that I've started forming recently, which is if something wasn't done, then it wasn't simple enough. That's my view. So I think this happens a lot when like that's basically what people say with overthinking. Like if I decide to exercise and then I don't do it, I personally think it's because something there was too complicated. Something was too easily got in your way.
In my case, if I decide I'm going to exercise, whatever, I'm going to go for a walk in the evening, I will put it off. In order to, like, for example, I used to work a lot. So I'm supposed to finish at 6 p.m., for example, but I would work until midnight or later. And I usually took a midnight walk. about 30 minutes into the stock market opening here locally. And it wasn't until I just was like, this is something that I do now, and I do it at this time, then it's not as heavy anymore. It's no longer a problem, because it's like, this is what I do. And obviously I also I'll weigh the pros and cons. If it's something that's good for me, or if there's enough pros, then yeah, I add it into the stack. But if it's something I'm like, well, why would you do that? If there's any question that it's not something I need to do or should do, then it just doesn't get added. But that's kind of speaking towards the system. So it's just basically added to my daily routine system. And therefore, once it becomes a part of that, it's now sort of just there, and I rely on it. And those are those guardrails as well. So I know that you and I differ a lot as far as routines and how we do the things that we do, or why we do them. Or, for example, the systems I create are intentional sometimes, more so than I feel like they might be for you. But you are definitely someone who relies on doing certain things repetitively. So how do you see systems in your daily life? And do you see yourself using systems in the same way that I use them, or how would you describe that, how those embody themselves?
So I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and I've been thinking about the difference between us. And my current theory is that actually both of us, in my view, may be overthinking in different ways. And what has allowed me to break free in my own way, because it's hard for me to it was difficult for me to add things to my system to do, for things to do, until I just said, I'm not going to find a good reason why it's going to be there anyways. So I'm just going to add it on, see how it feels, go for it, and then change later. And that's been my way to get out of it. As we said before, just chasing or pursuing energy, pursuing getting more things done. And then I think I see that like adding another thing is much easier to do from there.
I agree with you. We both have systems. We both tend to overthink. However, the way that the decision-making process is different. So like you said, you add something on to try it out and see how it goes. Whereas, so you were probably overthinking, like, should I do this or shouldn't I? And then the conclusion is, well, how do you know until you try it? But for me, it's more like the overthinking comes in. I don't know if I want to add this to my system permanently, because I tend to like to have a degree of permanence when I add something to a routine or to a system. And so for me, that's where the heaviness is. But once I take the time to create the pros and cons, or somewhat do the same as you and try it out, but with a lot more trust in it being something I'm going to add. So I think that's where there's a somewhat vague difference, but it is distinct. I have the intention of adding it permanently if possible to save time, whereas I don't think that really crosses your mind so much. It's a different type of efficiency. It's still efficiency for you, as in it's efficient for you not wasting time on thinking about it all day. So it's like that, whereas same thing for me. I don't want to think about it, nor do I want it to fail or not be something useful for me. So I would say I'm more likely to get locked in on thinking longer than you possibly, or at least using a lot more energy than is necessary to decide on something. But I think what's more important and more interesting is that you and I have described how things are for each of us, rather than answering whatever the question was that I've forgotten. So I think that's perfectly fine. Mm-hmm. So what I would move on to now is sort of giving a definition. What exactly are we talking about when we say systems? Because while it sounds very simple, it might be a little bit unintuitive for people who don't think this way. So a system, for me at least, is a repeatable process. So something I repeat, something I do over and over again, that has built-in logic. So this is something where you and I will also probably align, because logic is very important to us. So it's a repeatable process with built-in logic that reduces my need to decide or feel. So like I said, I don't want to, so actually I didn't really say this, but I don't want to have to keep thinking about, am I going to do this or not? This is a question I don't want to ask myself, because it's a waste of time. So once I put something into my system, it's there. I don't have to question it anymore. And I also don't have to feel anything, because I'm already going to do it. I've already decided to do it, and I rely on myself and I trust myself 100%. So that's a big thing. So I'll give one or two examples really quick, and then I'll see if your definition of system is similar to mine. What I think of is we mentioned working out. I mentioned I used to walk, but this was during COVID times. But currently and previous to that, I would go to the gym. So I had a very strict gym regimen. I was going 5 days a week. Mondays was leg days. Tuesdays was chest and triceps. Wednesdays, back and biceps, etc. And while that was very strict, obviously it can be flexible, but ideally it wouldn't be. So it's easy when I go, what day is today? Oh, it's Monday. I'm doing legs today. Instead of, oh man, I don't know, what should I do? Or how do I feel today? Or like all these kinds of things. Like my idea is just go. If you really can't handle it, go home. That way, like I said, I don't have to think, I don't have to feel, I don't have to make any decisions. The decisions are made for me. And one thing that's built into that or baked into that is, you might be asking, well, how do you know? How do you know you can trust that? Well, I have experience. I've tried different possibilities in the past. I've tried doing, let's say, legs after arms, or just weird combinations of things, and they don't work. And I also studied how my body works and how other people's bodies work, and I know that 72 hours is typically the amount of time required for certain muscle groups to repair, etc. So all this stuff I'm explaining sounds like, why do I need to know that? But that's what helps me to make these decisions. I think about these things until I no longer have to, and now I can permanently go to the gym until the day I die, always adjusting ever so slightly, but not having to think about or debating whether or not I'm going to do it or when I'm going to do it. Also, I always go at the same time, reliably. I'll just leave with that example. So let me ask you now, what are systems to you, or how would you define systems? And what types of systems do you currently have in place in your daily life, or maybe ones you've recently decided to change or make adjustments to?
So I think according to your definition of system, I don't follow systems. Rather, what I tend to want to do is carry a set of principles and live by them, and then build out whatever temporary system follows that. And then the next day, if I decide I want to snapshot a different system, I'll do that instead. So what stays the same is like the way I view the world, and then how I execute that is what is constantly changing. That's how I approach it. So here's an example is my workouts. If I'm like, the way I handle workouts is I'm going to go in a cycle. Chest or push, pull, legs. And then a rest day. Push, pull, legs, rest day. Push, pull, legs, rest day. Whatever day of the week it is, I have no idea. But if I wake up, or if it's time to work out and I'm too tired, I'm not going to work out. I'm just going to make this a rest day. And then the rest day moves. And so like that's just my very loose structure. But what I use as like the baseline is the tiredness and general status of my muscles. This is like my approach to it.
Yeah, there's a lot of great things in what you just said. The first thing is the way your systems are applied is, like you said, I like that it's basically a temporary thing. It's like when you build when a contractor builds something, they build those little shacks, or they just like build scaffoldings and things that they're going to tear down anyway. So it's like you're constantly like it's built such that it's meant to be broken down. So I'd say that's not very stable. It's not meant to be stable, and therefore it's meant to be able to be refactored, or I don't know what word I'm looking for here, but to be broken down or rebuilt again in a different way. So that's cool. And then talking about the gym, I've met plenty of people, same thing. They do push, pull, legs, or however they see fit, and it doesn't really make sense to follow a 7-day week structure. In fact, that was hard for me at first too. But what I mean by hard is not to follow, but to fit everything into, because obviously that's how I'm thinking. And so I also was like, okay, well, let's just see how this goes with just working out in a certain order. So for me, it wasn't just feel how my body is and take a day off. I wasn't doing that. But what I mean is like I would have a cycle that wasn't fitting the 7-day week, but it still was structured. As in, like, I don't know how to explain, like, let's say I started on Tuesday and I did chest. My next chest day might not be until the following Wednesday, but I didn't skip or rest or do anything out. Like the system stayed the same from A to Z. But that works too. That works for me. But what doesn't really work for me is, like you said, kind of just listening to my body and not going if I don't want to go, unless I'm like ill, sure. Just one issue with that for me is if I'm working out with a partner, for example, that doesn't work at all. That does only work if you're working individually, because you're not gonna, your friends are gonna get angry if they're like, yeah, Tuesday we're gonna go do back, and you're like, well, no, I'm on legs already, or whatever, etc. So that's the only sort of flaw I'd see in that structure. But I think you would also agree that, like, if that were the case, you'd make adjustments. I would hope so, or figure something out, find a middle path, or just you wouldn't work out with anybody ever, and that's also an option. So I do like talking about the gym, so that's pretty cool.
As I was listening, I did realize another thing that we do agree upon, which is that it is expensive to think about decisions. And I will add my own principle-based way of handling this, which is almost like a thought experiment. I realized that whether I go or not, it's actually the same amount of effort and energy. The energy is just whatever meaning I create in my head. And so whatever I do, just do that. That's kind of how I've gotten around this whole decision energy thing. So just to add, that's my like principle-based way of handling decision fatigue. Just go or not, just do that, and don't take too long deciding.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you pulled that together, because I didn't notice that right away, and I think that's what's really interesting. Because I was thinking, how does he handle that? And what you said, it's like the thing that's different between you and I is like, you don't need to go. You don't need to do anything. Or I don't know, put whatever word in there makes the most sense. Whereas for me, I like committing to things. I like planning things out and following through on those plans, because I have goals. And I know that the only way for me to get to where I'm going is by doing something. Whereas for you, goals aren't, I mean, I can't say you don't have goals. What I mean is your goals aren't like, they aren't the same. They're not forward moving. Your goals are more just like, let's say one goal might be to think less. One goal might be to live a better life, or just to be happy. Or the goal might be to go to the gym, but still within the confines of the principles that you've defined for yourself. Like you said, whether you go or not doesn't matter. And thinking about it is what you don't want to do. So as long as you've made the decision that you're going to either do it or not do it, you have now served yourself. You've served your ego, or however you want to call it. Like you basically doing exactly what you said. You're following through. So that, I think the follow through is what's important for me. Whether it's you're following through on your principles, or I'm following through on my principles, or whether he or she is following through it's just as long as you're kind of being true to yourself. I don't know what that is, but that's important to me. So I want to ask you one more question about systems before we move on to the next thing. What do you think makes a system fail safe versus fragile? You can apply it to your system or any examples of any systems that I've implemented.
Yeah. Reflecting upon the examples of my own life, I personally have, like, as highest number one of what makes a system fail is if the first step, whatever step you're doing is just too big and too undefined. That's really all it is. So that's why they say, if you want to start going to the gym, well, lay out your clothes, put your shoes in the right place, and then the night before already decide that you're going to go, right? So the only thing you have to do now is put on your shoes, put on your clothes. And what I realized about that is, like, as long as I don't think in any of that process, it's as easy as staying home. It's as easy as staying home. Because if I don't think. But if I think, like, oh, should I do this? Should I not do this? Then it becomes heavy, right? So that's, so back to your question about, like, what makes a system fail is if one of those steps is just too big. If I say, okay, hey, Derek, tomorrow let's fly to France. That step is too big, and it's probably not going to happen. That's an example of something where I think, like, to me, number one, that's the reason why systems fail. There's a step there that's just too big in the system.
I don't know why, but even being who I am, I would really like to someday just have someone say that to me, or me say that to them, and that actually be like fine, and then just do it. Hey, let's go to France tomorrow. Okay. That would be, I don't know why that seems really cool. I don't know why I have no intention to do that right now, but something about that seems very freeing. I think it's just, it feels like I must be financially free in order for that to be even possible or something. And I think that's what's enticing to me, because that for me is the ultimate goal, is more or less never having to, like, the reason why I build all these annoying systems, so they're annoying to me sometimes too, and have all these goals and have all these endpoints that I want to get to, is so that I can bloody get to them. That's one of the things. Like, that's why I hound people too, when they're constantly like, oh, I want to do this, but I don't know how, et cetera, et cetera. Or I have a plan, but I don't know how to like actually get started. And I'm thinking, you're only getting older. You only live for so long. If you're not doing it, you're never actually going to get to where you want to be. So why don't you, whether, like you said, maybe the steps are too big or whatever it is it's holding you back, why don't you try to break that down as much as possible? Figure out what you can do today. Get it done. Don't question it. Just do it. Because tomorrow if you do decide you want to look back, you'll be like, that's how I got here today. I did that thing yesterday. Hey, why don't I repeat that process? Why don't I move on to the next thing? I've already broken things down. Oh, and then 3 days later, I've now done 3 things. I am now even closer to where I'm trying to get. I feel good. I feel good about that. And those are the types of breakthroughs that I'm looking for in myself, because sometimes I get stuck too. And I'm looking for that in other people as well. And so that's where, for me, I feel that systems are very useful. Now, we have sort of left the emotional side of this behind. And so I feel like the emotions is part of what tells someone, oh, I can't do this, oh, I'm not ready. Or I think even emotions can cause, it's kind of contradictory. It causes people to overthink, because thinking and feeling aren't exactly the same thing, but they are judging or judgmental processes. And so I think those feelings are, while feelings are important, sure, they are more times than not going to get in the way of you sort of, or rather, let's just say they're sort of the antithesis of systems. Systems, like I said, are autonomous, whereas feelings are constantly changing, like the waves of the ocean. Anyways, I use systems to make sure I act or I follow through, even when I don't feel like it. I know that you're someone who likes to experiment. What do you think would happen if you were to treat systems, or maybe even creations of systems, as experiments?
So I actually think I absolutely do that. And every single thought I have, like the most important thoughts that I think I have, are principles to add to my own mindset so that I can run this experiment running system. That is like, if we want to be very direct about this, I think that is a system that I always want to build, which is, how do I best iterate through my experiments? That's the system that I'm building. And as I talked about that, I realized, or I remembered certain quotes from our great tech giant friends. Jeff Bezos has a quote saying, the success of a business comes from the number of experiments it's running. And if you know it's going to work, then it's not an experiment. That's a Jeff Bezos quote. So he's basically saying, we want to make sure we're running things that have a high chance of failure. That is the way we know we're succeeding. That's the Amazon view. There was also an Elon Musk quote that goes, I live by the assumption that I'm wrong, and the goal is to be less wrong. And so these are two people with a highly experimental viewpoint, and you can see it in the kinds of businesses they're running. Like this is the system that they have set up for their startups. And I thought about, as you were talking, I thought about how that's probably not the way you want to run, like an insurance company, for example. And so I thought about how almost perhaps like based on the kind of venture you're running, you would want to have a different kind of structure, different kind of system set up. And what I see in those quotes is like the experimental system, and that is very much the kind of system that I run. And that's why I'm looking for these principles, to be able to run that. But I've been thinking about how there are all these different kinds of systems, some that are more risk tolerant, and that's what I seem to lean towards.
Yeah, I would almost completely agree with Jeff Bezos, except for I don't know that a high probability of failure defines whether something is an experiment or not. It's like you said, knowing the answers to something, you don't need to experiment. Experimenting is exploring the unknown. and just seeing what the results are. That might be driven. It might be, you might have an idea. That's why we create a hypothesis first, an idea of what we might expect to see results wise. But I don't think it matters whether the risk is high or if the chance of failure is high. Now, that might be something that helps him to come up with ideas for Amazon, and that's great, but I wouldn't define it that way precisely. Obviously, I experiment as well, just to a lesser degree probably, and like I said, slightly more driven, slightly more with a little bit of intuition in there, saying, okay, I kind of know where I want to go. Let's see if this thing will work or not. Let's try it out, but very quickly pivot if necessary. So, and then looking at Elon Musk's quote, that's actually exactly how I look at things. Is I more or less have learned over time to not be pessimistic per se, but to just always assume that I don't actually know what I'm talking about. Because oftentimes what will happen is I'll say things as if I know, and I do sometimes. But for when I'm doing stuff for myself, when I'm moving into the unknown and I'm trying to create a new system, so this is completely new territory, I always try to tell myself, look, everything you've done up until now, sure, use it as a sort of secret weapon, sure, later, but like just pretend it doesn't exist and just look at everything as if it's completely new, like you don't know anything and you don't know what to expect. So I don't know if that's how you would approach, or if that's like how you explained how you're, handling your principles and experimentation, but I agree with both of them, and I think those are definitely good methodologies to use. So the point I've already been making is that I believe that my systems are better or greater than my emotions, or more important than my emotions. And so just to somewhat reiterate, a system for me removes the need to feel inspired. You just follow the path. Now, even in saying that, I really want to make something clear here. I'm not saying motivation is not important. Being motivated can help you to feel inspired, and inspiration can help you to come up with ideas, but I don't know that that's very necessary when you're in the thick of it, when you're already working on creating something, especially if your goal is to create a system. Your goal is to create something that is repetitive. You're not meant to be inspired. So it's not the time and place is all I'm saying. There's a time and place for inspiration, there's a time and place for motivation, etc. I think inspiration for me also, I'm having trouble right now because I'm conflicting in my mind. The motivation to me just feels like this like energy-based thing, but it's a battery that just gets drained. Whereas inspiration to me feels almost limitless, and I almost feel like inspiration is limitless in energy. So that could just be a personal bias, but I'm definitely feeling different about that word. That digression aside, motivation to me is mood-based. Systems are rule-based. So I think that's the separation there: mood versus rules. So I would ask you, would you argue that over-reliance on systems can make someone rigid or robotic? Because I know that I just stopped myself because I was like, man, that really sounds robotic. Would you say that can make people rigid or robotic? Or are systems actually what liberate creativity by removing clutter?
That's a great question, because I actually used to totally treat systems and like my own schedule. Like when I was younger, I'd be like, oh, that's it. I'm gonna change everything. Tomorrow I'm gonna wake up and follow this schedule. And I would treat that schedule as if it was the truth. And if I follow it, then I'm winning, and if I don't, then I'm failing. That kind of thing. If you have that attitude towards systems, I think that's what can cause them to become too rigid, too strict. And really, let me add, the biggest issue is it'll almost make you blind, because, as they say something like if whatever is measured becomes abused. They say something like that, and that's because the metric is not the point. You create the metric to be able to follow some ideal that you want, right? And if people no longer pay attention to that, then the system has been broken. So going back to this idea of schedules and systems, very recently I realized if I treat them as temporary, if I treat them as if I'm just creating them now and they're a map to allow me to navigate the world, then I actually think they're excellent tools of creativity, as long as I don't hold them as like this dictator over my life. So I guess long story, the short answer of what I'm saying here is, if I hold them loosely, that's one idea I've been really juggling with recently. Is like if I can set them sternly but hold them loosely, then they can be excellent tools, and they won't cause that like trapped feeling that I used to have with them.
Exactly. And me as the system creator, system follower, system this, system that, I do exactly the same thing. So I wanted to also make that clear. These are not, well, I mentioned earlier, I used the word permanence. I mean the system itself is permanent until it's no longer valid, until it's no longer needed. Systems should be removed when they're no longer useful. And that's something you touched base on just now. That rigidity is meant for the system itself. It's not necessarily meant to be placed on the person that's using the system. The system is merely to make your life easier so that you can be freed up to do other things, to be liberated in your creativity, remove that clutter, and create a smoother or better life experience, or however you want to, all of those things. Once we rely on the system solely, and we are like, first of all, relying on a system completely is terrible for a number of reasons. And the same thing, not wanting a system to change, or saying, well, this is how it's always been. I can't stand even saying that sentence out loud. Those are not what I'm talking about. Now, I'm not, that's okay if that's how someone thinks. And I'm assuming that's not how you think. So anyway, I'm just reiterating, but also backing up exactly what you said. I mean, same with me. The systems themselves, while they're very important, I know what I want. That's why they seem so rigid. I'm very certain on what I want. That's why. The moment my mind changes and I no longer want that system is going in the garbage. That does hurt, because time has been used to create that, but that's part of the game, right? The whole game is to get ahead where you can, when you can. So
to add a concrete example, we were talking about, fitness. Yeah, the whole reason why you have that whole schedule of exercises is to get the fit body, or like to lift what you want to be able to lift. How you get there is just how you get there, right? So, it's great to have some kind of clarity for that, but also whatever gets you there is good, right?
And it depends on your goal. Some people are there lifting weights. Some people are running. Some people are doing calisthenics. Some people are doing all kinds of like specific, very, I don't know how to word it. Like, you can tell the exercises are for certain sports, for example, working out a certain muscle group in a certain way just to excel at that sport. So everyone works out for different reasons also. So that's the other thing. Every system that you create is built for you, if it's one that you've created, and it serves its purpose until it doesn't. So every morning when I get up, at least, I want to be able to wake up and execute without needing to think. That's really the goal for me. I don't want to think when I wake up. I don't want to have to plan my day. I'd like my day already to be planned for me, because that, again, frees me to do other things. However, if I have, every morning and when I wake up, if I have to summon the motivation to just get up or to do anything, then it's already a bad day for me. So that's what I'm saying. It's like if I have to rely on my emotions, then, or I think people in general, then they would suffer quite a lot. And I feel personally systems allow me to be human whilst operating like a machine. Now that, I don't know if that really makes much sense, but it's basically saying I can operate autonomous, or I can just be very efficient and get things done without having to think about it, so that I can be myself, so that I can be human, so I can be Derek, right? So I would ask you, do you think the goal in implementing systems should be automation of behavior, or is there value in constant self-adjustment? Do you think the goal should be automation of behavior, or is there value in constant self-adjustment?
So I would actually answer both. And also, yes, it is more natural for me to want to do the second, constant self-adjustment. However, I also have recently found a lot of value in automation of behavior. What I've been doing these days is just having just a list of things that I can do, and then just taking one off the hopper and just diving into it. And I think the reason I do it is very different from you. I've been talking about energy. So the reason why I want to do this is so that I don't want to have to figure out what I'm going to do next. I just want to dive into something else. And it doesn't really matter what it is. Like that might be the difference between us two. I just want to know what to do so that I can lose myself in that. I personally link this to an idea of something called flow state, which is I view almost as like me, like I feel it as like an optimal flow state is me not being there. And so the more I know what I'm doing next, the less I have to think, the less I have to like actively be there. And the more like I'm in what I'm doing, the better I feel every day actually. And so that's what I'm pursuing when I do it.
I've talked in previous episodes about momentum. Do you feel that flow state also creates a certain amount of momentum? And that breaking out of the flow state might act as an inertia?
Exactly. Well, inertia, I think I personally view, so a current theory I'm holding right now and I'm exploring is the idea that my best ideas will come from momentum, which is something that happens because I've been doing so many things that I stopped blocking myself with all these conscious thoughts. And then it just comes to me like, oh, maybe I should do this instead. And that like, my current theory is the more I'm like occupied in doing things, the better I will be able to grow and like figure out my routine. That's where I feel my routine is going to come from. Not this like imaginary theater that I'm doing like alone, building out the schedule, but instead, like I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm like, how about 5? That's where I see the ideas come from, like in the moment there.
So you have this like stack of things that you're working on, and as you're working on them, stuff just gets added naturally because you came up with these new ideas that you would not have come up with otherwise.
Yes.
Perhaps.
Yes, and I will just say like, what feels natural. For me, what it feels like is like, if I'm just sitting there, I say 1, 2, like that's as far as I feel comfortable imagining forward. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to do 1, 2 and see what comes next. And I think we have seen that difference in thinking. That's how I would define why I'm less inclined to build out the whole thing in one go.
Yeah, I just see myself, if I were doing that, I would lose all confidence in myself because I wouldn't know where I'm going next. And so that's what's interesting, because that's your comfort zone. Yeah. So I personally don't rely on hype, but I will admit that curiosity does drive me sometimes. And that's, to me, different than motivation. So motivation is, like I said, it's feelings, whereas curiosity is more like, it's basically you have this unknown in front of you, but it's very enticing. And so even I will kind of break free from what I'm working on, or it's kind of I don't know, it's not like a break per se, but like I don't know where I'm at in the day, but if I'm curious, I'm gonna look into it if it's not too dangerous. So do you think curiosity is a better long-term driver than motivation? And can curiosity be embedded into systems themselves?
I absolutely do think curiosity is an excellent motivator. However, I will say the full picture is the curiosity stems from some hypothesis I come up with, something that I think is true about the world, and then I set out to prove that to be true or false, as we talked about with experiments. And so I think curiosity, is an excellent motivator. However, I also think that expecting it to happen is not powerful enough. And so my recent approach is to build momentum, mix that with curiosity, and in that place of just like being in the moment, then it'll be really easy to do the next thing and know what to do. Inertia, like the object that's already in motion will stay in motion.
For me, I just realized curiosity is when I'm in the mood to take on risk, it allows me to skip steps. So though I know that if I'm really curious, like if I did this, so like I have steps A, B, C, D, E, But if I did this on step B, is it possible to get to D without actually doing C? If I just modified B a little bit or whatever. So like I think that's a form of curiosity, and that's one that is more natural for me to sort of try out. But I do also just wonder, like, if I turn this up all the way, what does that sound like? I do that a lot with music. When I'm working with music, I like to experiment a lot. So I feel like that's a certain level of creative curiosity. I'm not quite sure if I heard an answer to whether curiosity is embedded into systems, or if you did sort of indirectly tell me, can you give me a little bit more direct clue as to how that would work?
So in my current understanding of systems, I don't think curiosity is built into them, embedded into them. I think I think curiosity can be much more embedded into the culture of a company, as we talked about with those quotes. And I actually think curiosity, I actually kind of feel like it just runs completely against systems. That's me. And I also think that what I generally do when I hear a system is I think about like why they're creating the system. And then from there, I think it's much more natural for curiosity to stem, to say, oh, they're trying to do this. Oh, well, here are some other ways that I think we could do that. And that's where it comes from, which I think a lot of people who would rather me follow the system don't really appreciate. So the short answer is no, I don't think curiosity is part of systems.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I agree with you 100% on that. And I definitely have seen how that doesn't. I mean, I've seen examples of it. That's how I know. And I can't think of where it would really fit in unless the system itself called for it directly for some reason. If you're relying on motivation, you're already behind. Systems don't ask you how you feel. They just ask if you showed up.
Motivation is just a nice to have. You can have motivation and do nothing. You can have motivation and do something. What actually makes sure you do something is having a system so that you know exactly what to do next, and then you just do that. You don't have to think about it.
Build one system this week, just one. Make it so simple you can do it on autopilot.
Or treat what you're doing as a lab and lay out each thing as an experiment and run and redo and redo.